I totally agree. I had similar experiences when I was working at Wedding Bells. We were signing at $1 a word in the late 80s. So it is sad, and I hate it as an editor. I hated it as a freelancer. But I think as a freelancer, one way around it, and I made a good living when I was doing it, is to diversify as much as you can. Do good work for everyone you work for, and just try to think outside the box. But it's tough, and I agree, it's a perilous industry.
Yeah.
Well, Erin, do you want to? I feel like we're getting a little bit off topic here, but
David, say what you're going to say.
okay.
I was just going to make one quick comment. A slight thing on the positive side, and this is a little out of my area as an editor, but I do have a friend who's a freelance writer who's made a pretty good career out of freelance writing, and most of his income is reselling stories. He'll sell it once to me for a pretty decent price, and he, you know, I joke with him. He wrote a story for me. It must have been 10 years ago. He went on an expedition at Whistler, where they take you out in the winter and build a igloo, and you spend the night in it. And 10 years later, that story is still getting cycled around the Phoenix Times and the Tucson Journal, and God knows what, and he's getting 20 cents a word for it. But he's probably made, I don't know, thousands and thousands of dollars on this one story he wrote 10 years ago. And that's a big chunk of where he spends his time, is reselling stories. So,
David, who is this?
But
this
name
is
one
John Lee.
person.
He's a travel writer.
Name one other person, you know, who's actually made a living doing that. I mean, maybe Daniel Wood is a writer who is productive enough and recycles stuff enough, but
Yeah, I gotta say, I feel like this reselling is like a elusive holy grail. I've never. But John Link is the.
John Lee. He's
John Lee. Okay, let's get him on the next panel.
What?
yeah, we got questions.
I was going to say, just to add to what you guys were saying, just about it being really tough. I know very few freelancers who are pulling it off without diversifying. And what I mean by that, I'm not sure what you meant by it, but it's just making sure that you have a mix of types of work. And you want to do that for a couple of reasons. You know, one of the reasons is because some of the work that pays better is the corporate work or the advertising work or that kind of thing, or there's research out there. I don't do a lot of that type of stuff, but I know that there is money to be made there. And when I have done it, it's been very lucrative, so that's great. Reselling is another part of it. The other reason that you want to do that is because things are changed so fast in publishing that you don't want to work for one editor. Like, I've been freelancing full time since 2008 is when I quit my job, and I don't have a single editor who's in the same spot as I did then. So, and it's not because they're all getting fired, but people are moving around, and some of them are getting fired, and some of them are, you know, going into public relations or whatever. Like, just people are moving all the time, so you want to be careful. Yeah, I think that's all I was going to say about that.
Okay, there was a question. Sure.
I was just going to ask, the chap who's reselling his stories and then reselling them 10 years later for 20 cents, isn't he shooting himself and the whole industry in the foot by doing so? If editors feel they can get content a lot cheaper that's 10 years later.
Well, yeah, but that's old content, and it's really not worth much. It's worth a lot when it appears first. That's why he gets, you know, $1 a word when it first appears. But 10 years later, it's worth 20 cents a word. So.
But it's still worth being printed.
Yeah. Well, you can leave it sitting on your desk, or you can sell it for 20 cents a word.
And you know, everybody in this room is in competition with everybody else in the room. It's a market. The writer that David was talking about is trying to make as much money as he can, as every writer is doing. So I don't know how you can expect writers to say, geez, I don't want to kind of cheapen the value overall of freelance writing. Everybody's scrambling. So, you know, that's just how the market works. Any market works. The reason that writing rates have gone down so much, I think, is that everybody's a writer now. Everybody's got a blog, you know. The internet has opened up the whole world. You see stories about events on Wall Street being written in Bangalore, you know, for 20 cents a word or 20 cents 1,000 words or whatever those Indian kids are being paid. So it's really tough, and I don't think you can kind of think that there's some sanctity about the whole enterprise of freelance writing. You have to find your place, and as Erin said, there's a lot of people who, you know, they get a corporate gig, or they get a PR gig, or they get something that has a basic income every month, and maybe they don't like writing for a technical journal, or maybe they don't like writing, you know, translating Korean instructions for IKEA or something like that, but that's what you do to get that basic check going, and then you build on top of that. But it is tough, and it is highly competitive, and magazines don't pay by the word. I certainly don't. All words are not created equal. If somebody, you know, when John Valiant writes about Stanley Park for us and gets paid $3 grand for 3,000 words, he submits a pristine, wonderful 3,000 words. When the woman I mentioned around the Ellison case produces 8,000 words that don't know where to start or end, the actual cost of the magazine is, you know, 20 hours of my time as well. So the actual cost of those 3,000 words has to be factored in. Anyway.
I just wanted to add one thing about the reselling, which is the last point that I meant to make on my last comment as well. And that is, I think that reselling can be thought about in a couple of different ways. One is the actually taking the exact same story and bringing it somewhere else. But I think what's probably more common is, and what's worked better for me, is having, you know, building on some kind of expertise, some kind of beat. And I'm not doing all my work on that because I'd be way too bored, and that's not why I'm in this this business. It's because I'm curious and I want to go out there and learn new things. I don't have time to reinvent the wheel every time I start a new feature. I can't do that. Maybe I could do it in the 80s with the gas prices back then, but I can't do it now. So, so what I'm doing is I'm building up some knowledge and some story ideas, and I am sometimes writing very similar stories over and over again. I got this email asking from the Toronto Star a couple months ago saying, hey, we really want to do a story on whether going to university is a good investment for students. Can you do that? And I thought, yeah, I've written that story 5 times before, you know? So, I mean, that's kind of the reselling that I'm doing in a way. I'm going out and I'm finding new sources or whatever, but I'm current on the research. I know what the latest stuff is out. I know what the thinking is. I've got my go-to sources, so it does make it a little bit easier. Yeah.
One positive about diversifying that I found when I was a freelancer is, you know, those days where you just have writer's block and you just want to run away and shriek and drown yourself or something. You can do something else. You can write a business profile, or you can, you know, proofread for someone, and so it's not all bad, the diversification.
Yeah, I want to ask a question about answering your emails. I had an experience where I sold something to Cart magazine, which was a seniors magazine, and then the next month it turned into Zoomer. I was the last in Cart, and I had a great Zoomer story, and I found out who the editors were from one of the editors that had been at Cart, and I thought, oh well, you know, I had a very good story. They'll definitely read my email. They never answered, and I thought, you know, it was a really good story. They didn't, and I
Did you write back?
I emailed one more time, and then I'm afraid I lost it.
I know,
thought,
it's demoralizing. I know, it is demoralizing.
I think that they might have decided it wasn't a story for them because it was about Indigenous grandmothers, and they were all into glamour and this and that. But the fact were, these 2 editors were not seniors. They were very, very glamorous young women, very celebrity oriented, and I just got it into my head that they just don't bother.
It's, you know, it's hard to predict why, and I know myself sometimes, like, forgive me anyone in this room if I haven't answered your email, because it happens, we get busy, we get so swamped, and you really, I've been on the freelancer side of this too, and you wonder, and you know, you try to create scenarios as to why they're not answering. They may have simply been busy developing their entire new approach, which takes an incredible amount of energy.
With a lot of
So,
emails.
I'm sorry, I know it's a very tough part about being a freelancer.
And maybe, I think this is a good, maybe, point is, what are, can you think of any unexpected reasons, or maybe not so obvious reasons, why an editor wouldn't accept a pitch that is a good story? Is it maybe like time constraints, or space constraints, or advertising constraints?
Well, you have to define a good story. The freelancer thinks it's a perfect story, and the editor thinks, you know, we're all about glamour and breast implants and pretending you're not a Zoomer, pretending you're still 40. So why do we want to see a bunch of Indigenous grandmothers? So you think it's a wonderful story, and you know, Suzanne or whoever it was thinks that's not us.
Yeah.
But
But
that said,
is the thing.
well, look, I've not answered lots of emails, not out of my intrinsic being a jerk, but just, you know, they slip off the screen and you get 300 emails a day or something, and they're gone, you know? So, and I'm bad at organizing it, so.
Yeah.
But don't take offense when you don't hear back. Just send another thing, saying, hey, 2 weeks ago I sent you this, just wonder if you got it, wonder if you had an editorial meeting, had time to consider it or whatever. I think there's
I really love those follow-up emails. I really, really appreciate it, because I too, we get hundreds of emails to our editor inbox, and then to my own email address, the same thing, a couple hundred a day, and it can be overwhelming. It almost makes me wish for the days where things came in by mail again.
I do too. I have writing pitches.
I just wanted to say too, just I keep like a list on my, kind of a chart on my wall that says every pitch and when I put it out and whether I follow it up, and I just whatever. And I'm really I nag people, I guess, if you would call it that.
That's great.
And I understand that editors are really busy, so I try not to be a pain, because I understand that. And with all of that, like, it's very, very rare that someone never gets back to me. Like, I think my editors are pretty good. They have the best of intentions. And maybe the email I get back is like, yeah, the story's not working, you know, whatever. But at least, it's pretty rare that editors just don't respond if you follow through.
So do you go, like, until you get a yes or no? On every
Generally,
pitch?
and I mean, at some point I'll probably write, if I haven't heard on my second follow-up, I'll write like, you know, look, I really need to bring the story somewhere else. If I don't hear back from you by this time, I'll assume that you're not interested, but usually I get a yes or no. Like, I don't know, I feel like editors, they try their best anyways.
Yeah, if I could just add, for all my talk a few minutes ago about how approachable I am, I'm probably more guilty than anybody of not answering emails. And that's because I do get a ton a day, and 90% of them are from PR companies whose job it is to get their clients some press. And I figure I'm doing them a favor when I don't respond. I'm just not going to prolong the agony, I just delete it. And they can keep bugging me, and I'm just going to keep not answering. Occasionally, a genuine email will just, you know, disappear. I'll push delete, thinking it's just another PR pitch. And if you really are convinced that you did put some work into it, it really was a good pitch, and you re-email me and say, you know, I sent you a pitch that I really thought was pretty good, yeah, I will respond. You know, like the other editors here, I was a freelancer once, I know what it's like, and I really do try to go out of my way to encourage freelancers. If I don't think it's a story for me, I tell them why not. If there was some thought put into the pitch, if it's a generic pitch that went to 100 magazines, no, I won't respond, but yeah.
We try to say yes or no. If it's really totally inappropriate for us, we'll try to say, thank you so much, but it doesn't work for us because of this right away. If we like it, we'll send them something to say, we're considering it, we do our story planning in the spring of every year, we collect ideas in the fall of every year. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. Don't hesitate to get back to us. And some of the reasons we may say no to a perfectly great idea is we have to, in our 4 issues, have a fair regional representation with the features, just so, you know, we're not overlooking, just as Gary Stephen is looking to represent Vancouver all the time, we're looking to make sure we're representing the whole province. So just that particular year, we may have enough stories in the Caribou. So there can be a lot of complicated reasons. We also work full year ahead of time so that we're photographing in spring for spring of 2013. So I've already assigned out 2013 and most of, or 2013 spring and most of 2013 summer. So we're working a full year ahead because we have to be in season.
Well, that's a good question. You know, say, David, someone's interested in covering, you know, the launching of a wind farm in June. How early should they pitch that story, and where might it be able to end up in the magazine? What kind of time considerations, in other words?
Yeah, that's one of the most common mistakes I get from freelancers is, you know, oh, something's happening a week Tuesday, I'd like to write about it for you. Well, our lead time is about 3 months. That's the shortest time frame between pitching and appearing in the magazine. So we just can't cover things the way a daily newspaper can. So that's why we're always looking for bigger issues, bigger trends, not daily news events that will be out of topic a week from now. So yeah, about 3 months is the minimum lead time.
Are you working on a similar lead time?
Yeah, and it's really helpful actually when you pitch to say, you know, there's a new kind of chocolate that costs $800 a gram being sold at Granville Island, and I want to explore where it came from and what organic designation means when you're talking about chocolate. So why don't you think about it for February, for Valentine's Day? February of 2013 might be a good time for you to run it. If you can kind of help us, again, do our job, we plan issues well in advance. We're always sort of a year planned out in advance. Now, if stories fall through and things change, and occasionally the advertising department will come to us and say, can you do something on real estate again soon? Because there's, you know, we've got a lot of real estate advertising, and they keep saying to us, when are you going to have another piece about where to find undervalued real estate, or our kids being squeezed out of Vancouver because of the cost of real estate? They want to advertise, but they want to know that there's some kind of coverage of real estate in that particular issue. So being able to, you know, think well ahead and, as I say, help us do our job by saying, my grandfather died at Dieppe, and I want to write about him. He grew up in Point Grey and blah, blah, blah. Maybe it would be a Remembrance Day sort of idea for you in the fall. That just helps us get a little further along in thinking about it.
I'm going to open the floor to questions in about 10 minutes, I think. Erin, do you want to say something on this topic?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that one of the ways that I've tried to make those long lead times work is to sort of have that balance of bigger pitches I'm working on with shorter stuff I can turn around, because you don't know, there's so much work that needs to be done by an editor to be able to say yes to a story. I'm sure you guys can say that. And there's so many things that a freelancer can never know about that could be reasons that it won't work. Maybe there's something that a writer is currently working on that's too closely related that hasn't been published yet. That's happened to me like 3 times this month. But, or maybe, you know, there's just so many reasons that you can't know, so you can't beat yourself up over rejection. So what I've tried to do is just try to balance it. I always have to be working on the next big pitch, even if I feel like I have a lot of work on my plate right now, because it's going to be so much further down the line before I actually get to work on that story. So I'm always booking 3-4 months in advance all the time. And then I've got, you know, a mix of stories I can turn around faster, stories I can pitch faster that are, you know, usually for me it's the Globe, it's newspaper stuff, or some of my regular things, so that I can fill in that time when those stories don't work out.
I also, maybe this would be sort of a good final question or topic before we move to audience questions. I asked for anecdotes you could share, whether that might be a you know, long shot assignment that turned up a great story, or, you know, key learning moments in your career. Anyone?
Well, I can say that some of the best pieces that I've published over the years have come from unlikely sources, and as I said earlier, have not been the story that was intended or that was pitched or conceived originally. I'm trying to think of a specific example at Van Mag. we published a story in the last year that online was called "The Vancouver Men Suck." In the magazine, it was called "Few Good Men," and it was by a wonderful writer, Catherine Ashenberg, a woman who's about 60, well-traveled.
She's 60 years old?
Yeah, well-traveled, erudite, cosmopolitan woman, PhD, written several books, etc. And when we first talked about, I kept hearing from women in Vancouver how lame Vancouver men were, just sort of anecdotally. Like, you know, we go out on a date and we go to the Grouse Grind and I'm supposed to meet the guy at the top and we have a beer and that's the date or something. So I started asking around about it. I started talking to Catherine about it, and she started saying, well, I could talk to my daughters. Catherine lives in Toronto. She's been back and forth between the two cities all her life, but her one daughter in particular lives here. And she said I could write sort of a profile about my daughter and her experiences, because I had a long chat with her. She's now married to a doctor, but she had a lot of weird dating experiences. So how about if I profile my daughter, but she doesn't want to be named? And I said, well, I don't really love pieces where, you know, Julie, asterisk, not her real name. Anyway, this whole thing morphed into Catherine interviewing, you know, 40 or 50 women of all ages in Vancouver, and coming to understand that basically women in Vancouver do think men in Vancouver are inordinately lame in their sort of unsocialized, in their dealings with women, in their lack of any kind of gallantry or chivalry or whatever. And it caused a shitstorm on the web. It caused more response than anything we've published. It caused a wonderful rebuttal from a guy basically saying, well, Vancouver women are pretty lame in their own way. Look it up online. It's funny and really interesting, actually. So that was a piece that just began with, you know, Catherine saying, why don't I profile my daughter, and turned into something quite different and in a way quite wonderful.
Any other stories you'd like to share before we, maybe some questions will spark some. Jane?
I don't really have a story like that, and I've been a writer longer than I've been an editor, but just some general comments on being a writer. I think never turn down work. Work hard, meet deadlines, always. Remember that when you're out there in the field, you're representing your client. So good feedback will come to your editor from the people you're interviewing when they're fact-checking. And as I said earlier, diversify, think outside of the box. And if you love what you do, you've got the best job in the world. As far as I'm concerned, being able to ask questions, learn, be curious, being paid for being curious is the best job in the world. So I'm really grateful that you all came out to listen to us tonight. And yeah, it's a great profession, as challenging as it can be.
I don't have any, well, I won't get into the details of my specific stories I'm thinking of, but I just wanted to say that although I was arguing that, you know, you should go into this with a lot of ideas and not get too attached to ideas, I think the two favorite stories that I did were both ideas that I had for years and pitched and pitched and pitched and pitched before I found the right angle, and they just kind of stuck with me. I just couldn't shed my mind of them, really. They just kept coming back to me. So if you do have one of those ideas that's been bugging you, you know, I think it's important to keep chasing those things, because ultimately, you know, those are the types of ideas that attracted me to writing in the first place. So yeah, and thanks for coming on.
Can I be obnoxious? And you just reminded me of a little story. Andrew Finley, who's written brilliantly for you, Gary, he pitched me, this is an example of a pitch that we were publishing in the summer, and I was so thrilled to work with him on this story. He wrote a brilliant article for you about his father and the death of his father, which I read. Then he pitched me a few months later an outdoor adventure story about trekking the Great Divide. With going back, his father passed away about 18 months ago or 2 years ago. But as a child, his father was a real mountaineer and dragged the children in the family along on these mountaineering vacations, really rugged land. So his idea was to go back there with his 18-month-old daughter, who'd never met the grandfather, his brother, and their partners, and to sort of recreate the family trip. And bearing in mind the story he'd written for you and the power of his personal story, I embraced it. And I worked with him on it. We sent him there. It's going to be appearing in our summer issue. It's a beautiful story, and the photography is incredible. And so I really encourage you to look for your personal stories and follow up with them, because we love that. It's going to pull heartstrings, and it's powerful. Yeah.
Questions? Does anyone have questions? Yes.
Just curious how much value there is in having a website rather than just linking to a clipping or two.
I'm just going to repeat the question. How much value is there in having a website instead of just linking to clips you've done?
I don't bother looking at people's websites much. They're all sort of the same, by and large. And, you know, if you send your best clip or whatever, in fact, I don't often read clips. It's like, this idea doesn't make sense in this magazine, or this person's got something, is kind of how I react.
So I myself don't put a great deal of value on somebody's website, although I'm sure you should have one, you know, just because people trip over it, and people looking for writing expertise for medical journals or technical journals or whatever might find you. But I'm sort of indifferent.
I like them. It depends if the idea is intriguing, then I'm really thinking about you for an important feature. I'll go look at it. The clip is the main thing, just one clip with your best work. If you're at a social outing and you meet me, if you give me a business card, I will always look up your website. I'll keep the card. We've had a conversation. That's when it's really useful. If you send me an email with a pitch, though, I'll read the clip if I'm interested in the pitch, and chances are I won't then go to the website because I just don't have time. So they are useful.
Yeah.
Subject lines.
Subject lines.
What do you look for in a subject line? When you get the story right away?
Well, to me, the key is if you can let me know that you're an aspiring writer who is pitching a story, somehow in 2 words, just to distinguish you from all the PR crap I get, all the other clutter. You know, to me, like I said, I'm always looking for writers, so if I know it's a writer pitching a story, I'll open it up. Whether I read, you know, how much further I read depends on the quality of the pitch.
You want to see the word query or story idea or pitch in the subject line.
I would totally agree, because of all the volume of email. If I see a pitch, that excites me. If I see strange new spiders found in Naramata, or like, if there's something that provides a little bit of more information, it's great. But query or pitch or story idea, really important.
No, I've got to just say quickly, if I see, you know, strange new spiders in Naramata, delete immediately, because it's just so many, you know, weird little businesses are trying to catch me with. I guess you do, but you know, it's just some internet scam or something that's gone. So.
Yeah, really, story idea, picture.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I send a query letter, I'll try and think of a headline. Like I'll think of a headline for my query and put that in the subject line. Is that, what do you think of that idea?
Headless man in topless bar. Hey, I'll open it. That's, you know, a classic New York Post headline that's always cited as, you know, how you get people's attention. I sort of agree with David, you know, strange new spiders found in Naramata. It's like, I don't know what this is going to be. So no, but that kind of, it's meant to be intriguing, but in fact it's like, you know what? So if you indicate the subject, I mean, story idea, bald eagle crisis or something as a subject line, it's okay. I'll for sure open that and start reading about your bald eagle idea.
But the word story, like with your headline, I'd want the word story idea there, or it could look like a PR pitch. Okay, the dreaded PR pitch.
Yes.
This is going off the top of the pitch a little bit, but I just wanted to ask, like, what role, if any, do you see professional pitching playing in freelancers? Maybe this is more question, or I mean, anyone else? Do people have them under useful? Do you get contacted by agents that procure for you?
So agents. Do you get contacted by agents? And how does that have an impact on whether you assign or not?
No freelancer that I work with now has an agent, and actually one did. David McFarland did a story for us recently and said, talk to my agent, Derek Finkel in Toronto, and I said no, and he said okay. Because I don't want to spend an hour explaining to Derek Finkel that I understand the plight of freelance writers. I used to be one, etc., but no, there is no more money. No, we can't up this. No, we can't provide a transcription service. No, we can't provide research assistance. But no freelance writer uses an agent now. I used to be a book publisher and dealt almost exclusively with agents at that point. But in magazines, they're rare, and I've edited major writers in the US and the UK and stuff at Saturday night, and never dealt with an agent. Freelance writers can't afford to pay somebody 10 or 15% of the meager fee that they're getting paid.
I'm represented by an agent, Derek Finkel to be specific. Well, I think he's the only one, so it's not a coincidence. But I think he represents about 120 writers now, and it's definitely more of the writers that he represents come from Toronto in the East. There's not so many of us in Vancouver. And has that changed who I write for? Maybe. And there was, at the beginning, there was some times where it was pretty tense, where I was potentially going to lose a story or whatever over the editor not wanting to work with Derek Finkel. But all of those situations have been resolved since then. He represents me on every single one of my stories that are published by Canadian editors, not my international stuff. And he's paid for himself. He has succeeded in getting me higher rates than I was getting before, more than I'm paying him. I'm paying 10%. And I keep really close track of that because I can't afford to take that out of my salary. So it has worked for me. Has it been tough? Has it been uncomfortable? Absolutely. Was there some fights? For sure. I've been with him for about 3 years now, though, so those are kind of resolving. And in general, when I have that conversation with an editor after we've discussed the idea and I say, okay, Derek deals with my contracts and my pay rates and my invoicing, they say, okay, whatever. And they don't want to talk to him because he's a pain in the ass, but he's my pain in the ass.
I haven't been approached by an agent yet.
Just getting back to nagging, like what is the appropriate amount of time to wait between, say, your second and third nag, and what do you say in an email if you're not saying like pitch again?
Pitch again's good.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Just use a little bit of humor, because we are quarterly. And we do our planning sessions seasonally. You should hear. If you haven't heard from me by May or April, this time of year, then it's really appropriate to just shoot me a quick line and say, I'd like to pitch it somewhere else. Please release me, let me go, if you don't want
Yeah, I think you're well within your rights to keep nagging until you get a yes or no. And that was one thing I wanted to comment on before about persistence. And I know, eagles are fragile, and if you don't hear back, or even, I can think of one case where I met a new writer who hadn't written for me before. She wrote a short piece for me, and it was okay, not great. We had a bit of back and forth, and it took a bit of work. And then I just never heard from her again. And she probably thought, oh, gee, that guy thinks I'm not a great writer. I'm desperate for writers. Here's someone who actually did write for me and has proven she could write for me. And she should have been more persistent. I just sort of keep meaning to call her and don't. But,
Relationships.
Yeah, so persistence is, keep, as far as pitches go, keep nagging until you get a yes or no. You're within your right to get an answer. And then once you've either been rejected or done a brief piece, just persevere. So.
My rule of thumb, and maybe you guys think this is way too nagging, but whatever, is I send my pitch. If I haven't heard anything at all in 2 weeks, I send something else that just says, by the way, 2 weeks ago I sent this. I'm happy to leave it with you. I know it takes a long time, but can you just let me know where it's at? And then if I haven't heard anything a week after that, then I write one final email that says, if, I sent this 3 weeks ago, if I haven't heard anything from you a month later, then I'll assume that you're not interested. And usually it often takes longer than that for an editor to be able to say yes or no, but if they can at least get back to me in a one-liner and say, yeah, sorry, our story meeting is next week and it just takes time, or whatever. But most of the time I hear back something at least.
So you wait until the 4th email before you say, subject line, hey, asshole.
Yeah. She should work in circulation. This is your last offer.
That's right.
30% off. I'm sorry, Derek. I didn't need that. Does he do a day count for you?
No. Or Aaron, when you call people to start developing your pitch and get those people on hand for once to just pick up, how do you introduce yourself since you're not attached to a particular publication? You just say, I'm a freelance writer, I'm looking to do this story, can I do a preliminary?
This is a good question. I'm just going to repeat it so we get it on tape. How do you approach potential sources when you're writing a query letter but you haven't been assigned the story yet?
I would do it just like you said, and just repeat that for those in the back. Is that working? Sort of? Yeah, I would approach someone, and I'm likely not going to go and do an in-person 3-hour interview and take up their whole afternoon. I'm going to be doing phone calls for the most part. Depends what it is. If I need to make sure that I have, if it's a big profile or something and it's a sensitive subject, and I need to make sure I'm going to have the access that I need, I might spend more time. But this is a case where I think I probably use my website more than with editors. I do have a website. I don't put a ton of time into it or anything like that, but I put all of my stories up there. It's partially just so that I have that record of what I've done, because I'll forget. But I think it also, for me, it helps me get access to the interviews that I want. If people can just Google me and see, okay, yeah, she does write for this guy, and this is what she's been working on, and this is that kind of thing. I find that helps with access to sources, but I've never had a source say, oh, I don't have time to talk to you until you have a story commission. Like, they don't really know how the business works for the most part. So if you say, I'm a freelance journalist and this is what I'm doing, it works fine, usually.
Okay. Yeah.
You've talked about how you pitch a story for the first time, and if you have a piece that is being, it's about to be published or is published already, but you retain the rights to that story, how do you go about pitching to republish a story?
How do you pitch to republish a story?
Well, you don't. You know, although you sell only first serial rights to a magazine, the magazine is posting it on its website, so anybody who wants to read it can find it. So the whole business of you know, secondary and tertiary rights has sort of dried up because of the web. Unless you specifically say, along with first print rights, you have the right to post it on your website for 60 days. After that, you have to take it down, meaning, and then I'll be free to resell it or sell it to a newspaper in Tucson if I feel like it. That issue has kind of gone away with the internet, I think. That's been my experience.
I mean, I guess I'm thinking, for me, if it's a specific example where I have a piece that's coming out, and perhaps this is unusual, but I was told that for this feature that's coming out in July, I think, that the author retains all rights to the story, where, as opposed to the magazine. It's kind of a hybrid between a magazine and a journal. So I was told I could resell it, but I don't know how to go about doing that because I've never done that before.
Well, I think that is typical. We buy first rights, which means once we enter into the agreement, you can't sell it anywhere else until we've published it. But once we've published it, you own the rights to it, and you can resell it. And you know, I disagree with Gary a little bit in that I don't think the reprint market is totally dried up, because, for example, my friend who wrote the Igloo story, you know, the Tucson Sun Journal or whatever can't legally print it in its paper because it would be breaking copyright law to do that. Yeah, it's out on the internet and anyone can read it, but if the editor of the Saturday section of this Tucson paper wants a story about igloos, he's going to have to pay my friend to publish a story about igloos. So.
One thing that my editor, David Bierce, says often is, you know, look outside Canada, look outside the US. The publishing market in Canada is tiny. The market in the US is bigger, but there's a whole world out there, even in non-English speaking countries that have English language publications that, you know, might be fascinated in a story about Canada or about a subject in Canada. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
I was going to say too is my experience with reselling has been looking for a different way of packaging it. So I've pitched stories that I've written for newspapers to be repackaged in textbooks, for instance, and that has to do with my beat as well, and that has worked for me. And then going out of the country has worked, and yeah, those are kind of my two main ways of reselling. But a lot of that is being done by my agent. I'm not actually out there actively pitching this stuff. And when he brings that kind of money, and I'm very pleased because it takes zero work from me. So
we don't typically republish if you publish somewhere else, but we do. You do own the rights with your work with us. We have the rights for 6 months, and then it reverts entirely to you. And if we published it on the web, we pay you extra for it. Just my advice to you, if you're looking to repackage it, resell it, just view it as a new pitch entirely, and look for a totally different market, as I've been suggested.
So the question is, what happens when a story gets dropped?
Yeah.
Do you mean like if it's been assigned and then you submit it and the editor decides they don't want it?
Yeah, or they can't publish it.
You need to have established a kill fee or a policy. I avoid the transcontinental standard contract. So I contract with writers just by email, and so far I haven't been fired for doing it, although Transcon has tried to impose a kind of standardized contract. It's one I myself wouldn't sign as a freelance writer, so why would I ask freelance writers to sign it? So there is an understanding that if we commission the story and it doesn't work, or we deem it unpublishable, we pay a 50% kill fee, and the rights revert to you automatically. But every publication has a different policy there, and you need to know what it is before going in. It's a bit like getting married and saying, okay, if we do happen to get divorced down the line, do we need a prenup, or how's that going to work? You don't really like to think about it, but you should, have a mutual understanding.
Just to add to that too, I think that's usually in the case where there's something that goes wrong with the story, or you deliver what you think is a great story and your editor disagrees, or they don't think it was what you delivered, or something like that happens. But if you've pitched or if you've written a specific story and then it gets canceled for some other reason, and this is after it's been accepted, which the whole acceptance thing is there's a lot of gray area there. But the biggest cause that I've had stories canceled at this stage of the game is that advertising didn't come in as much. They don't have as many pages. So in that case, you'll be paid in full. I would assume that would be the same case with you guys, yeah. So that's the one main reason that I've had stories fall apart. And then the other reason is just that something goes wrong with the sources. You can't get it together. And in that case, if you're not able to file and you pull the plug even before you filed, a lot of the time you don't get paid anything. So you kind of have to make those judgments.
We pay in sort of a strain, like we pay half when we sign a contract with you. We pay half of the total amount right up front, and then we pay the other half, not at publication, but we pay it when the manuscript is deemed acceptable. So it may come back to you once or twice, and then we pay the other half. So in my experience, I've never had to kill a story. I've never had one of my stories killed. But if it happened with us, chances are you'd be paid.
Any other questions?
I have a good story about Peter Zofsky, the late broadcaster, who once sold a piece to the New Yorker, every freelance writer's dream, and then had it killed and got a $2,500 kill fee from the New Yorker. And he said, Jesus, I got to write more stories that they don't publish.
That's a sweet story.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions out there, and I can't. Oh, yes.
Sorry, really quickly. I was actually surprised that, I'm curious about what you mean when you say diversify, because if there's any feedback I've gotten from editors when I started my career was that I should specialize in something, which I found really difficult because I'm curious innately like most journalists, and I didn't want, or I've struggled with the idea of specializing in anything. And it's a constant battle I find because I can't push myself as like an expert in X, Y, and Z. But I'm good at being like, I have written about really obscure topics that have a range. So what do you mean by diversified?
What I mean is from my own experience, and I've had a successful freelance career. I mean how Erin interpreted it. I did some corporate work. I did some communications work. I still have a freelance client that I've had for 22 years. I kept a lot of the same clients. So make sure you have eggs in more than one basket. And I never really, I guess I specialized on lifestyle writing, but like you, I was always eager to learn about any subject. So what I meant by diversification is just keeping an open mind to opportunities that come up that can really help you pay the bills.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that you can interpret it in a lot of different ways, but I think the key is just not only pursue one way of making money. You can't, it's very difficult, at least until you get to a different place in your career where you are that amazing writer that all the editors want to work with. I think it's really difficult to say, all I'm going to write is long form magazine features on whatever I'm curious about this month. So for me, it's a mix of publications, types of publications, you know, magazines, newspapers, a few trade publications, that kind of thing. For other people, it's having corporate work. It can be done in a lot of different ways.
I'd add diversifying in subject area, I think is important too, contrary to advice you've had. You know, if you say, okay, I'm a food writer, that just shuts off 99% of the writing opportunities. And you know, besides whatever the trend of the month is, there's so many food writers right now. So, well, that's a bad example. But you know, I'm a science writer, I'm a whatever. That just shuts off so many opportunities. Sure, develop a specialty. That's how I got into it. I happened to fall into business writing. Then I got some business gigs, and then I could do some other writing. But you know, I wouldn't recommend approaching editors saying, you know, I only write about pigeons, or you know, whatever. So, yeah.
Can I just mention spec writing? It's one area that we didn't talk about.
Sure.
I don't want to encourage anyone to write long features for me on spec.
And can you explain what spec means?
Where you go ahead and write the article and you send it to me and say, how do you like me now? So speculative writing is just that. You're speculating that someone will buy your story. Where it's worked recently for one new writer that we've taken on, she closely examined our Due West section. She sent 2 short pieces on spec. One called something like 10 Quick Fox Facts, and the other one was on hummingbirds. And they were exactly our style, well written, and we could not resist using them. Because that's one area of the magazine where it's like an accordion, depending on the ads that we get, it shrinks or grows, and we ran them. And then the next issue, she sent us a pitch for one of our history features, and we took it, and we worked with her, and there was quite a bit of work to be done on the style because they're very rigid sort of style, but now she's one of our writers. So if you have time, you might consider it. It's a gamble, but if it's only 100 words and you've closely examined how a magazine, the style of the magazine, the content, what they're looking for, it may pay off for you.
But find out first whether they accept spec pitches. A lot just don't out of hand. So
yeah, features, I wouldn't recommend it. I've had some spec features come to me that have been shopped elsewhere, and they just don't fit. So,
I think one thing that's been helpful for me is developing. I don't know, it's not the word I mean, but forming, nurturing freelancer friends, writer friends who I can trust. And I, often, you know, say, what do you think of this idea? You know, who do you think might take it? Have you heard anything like this lately? Could you suggest any sources? That's been really helpful for me is having that, you know, small group of friends who you can trust, who are writers, who are freelancers, who get it, and who can help one another without, you know, obviously you don't want to, you want to trust these people, right? You don't want a great idea to be stolen, but yeah. Any other questions or comments from our panelists before we wrap up? Yeah?
I just have a bit of kind of question about the woman who's buying the idea of the two men who's met each other here. Can you sell an idea? Is there a way to sell the idea, or does the person just bring the idea and get something if they're not prepared?
Does the person, if you come up with an idea, do you get compensated for that idea even if you don't write it?
In the past, we've done that and said, you know, we'd like to send you $200 and assign it to somebody else, because it's actually a huge story and you're just out of J school or whatever, and the person we want to commission has written in this area of provincial politics for the last 20 years or whatever, knows everybody. So yes, you can get paid for ideas. Money is so tight now, you know, you don't get paid for much that you don't absolutely have to get paid for. The woman who made that suggestion, as I think I mentioned, was a photographic intern. She was associated with the art department, went around taking food shots for one of our restaurant packages, and we just invited her to a story meeting to see if she'd pipe up or whatever. So she wasn't even thinking. And I must say, it never occurred to her after the fact to say, that was actually my suggestion, do you mind giving me $200? And it never occurred to me. I thanked her for it and sent her a copy of the magazine and said, that was a great idea, thank you so much. But I did not include a check.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could quickly comment on pitching Tyee, because it's an online publication. Obviously, the turnover is much quicker, so just if you had any suggestions for more people yourself.
Yeah, I started as an intern there 4 years ago, and I've been working out of the offices ever since, doing other freelancing as well. So I haven't really had to pitch because I'm just there, you know, at editorial meetings and, you know, working closely with Dave. I've heard it's hard to pitch the Tyee from the outside, and I think that's because it's a small shop with a large pool of freelancers, and Dave's just extremely busy. And one suggestion I have is Robin Smith is the managing editor, it's a fairly new position for her. Sometimes I've found like pitching like a managing editor is better. They might have less on their plate than an editor-in-chief, certainly. So that's one suggestion I could give you. The Tyee has also recently launched a weekend edition that's looking for more arts and culture content, you know, looking specifically for outside voices. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Okay, well, looks like we have no more questions. So again, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I hope you found this enjoyable and informative. And thank you very much to Aaron and Jane and Gary, Stephen, and David for being on the panel. It was great.